The following is a conversation with Will Nicholls. He's a master astrologer, men's relationship sex coach, content creator, ordained minister, living legend, and tartufata enthusiast. Keep this man away from your truffles, ladies and gents. Will's wisdom is rooted in depth that feels as old as the earth and simultaneously carries the energy of a child on the verge of laughter at every moment, exuding rich love. You can follow him on Instagram at I am Will Nicholls and on YouTube under the same name. All links will be in the description below. Will also has an upcoming yearly astrology overview live event for 2021, which will also be linked in the description. This is the Sarafino podcast. If you like what you hear, click subscribe and tell all of your friends. And now my conversation with Will Nicholls. How do we know each other? I mean, you're not an olive oil supplier. You're not an olive oil dealer. You're where did we meet? How did we meet, Will?
How did we meet? Well, I heard of Sarafino. Actually, I tasted the olive oil before I met the face.
You had a hat.
Did I?
The Sarafino hat.
I did. Oh, that was funny. That was a funny story, actually. Because I found that at a thrift shop in my local town. And just so randomly.
That's before we knew each other.
Before we knew each other. And found a Sarafino hat. And I sent you a picture of that because I was like, this is hilarious. I had to buy it. It was like $5.
Well, I like to think that I surround myself, or I'm attracted to people that are wise and intelligent, and that I want to be able to learn something or a lot of things from. I almost want to say that I surround myself around people that are maybe even better than I am, which is hard to top, but
it is hard to top.
But yeah, you're definitely one of them, and I consider you like obviously one of my best friends. So, although you could also be my son, which is weird.
I know. You're actually born the same year as my dad. Isn't that funny? We were laughing about that. I think the first time
we figured that out was hilarious.
It was funny.
I couldn't believe it. I've never thought I would. I mean, I don't feel like I'm my age, but
no.
When I found that out, it was just like, what? One of my best friends is I could be his father? That doesn't make sense. Is that allowed?
We're both consenting adults.
Yeah, I've always been into astrology, but not anywhere near the level of what's real, I guess. But I was, even being young, I'd be opening this. My dad always got the Saturday Star, and I'd flip it. Barely would I ever read much in a newspaper, except the horoscopes was one of the things I read. I'm not even sure why. I don't know if it was like I felt I resonated with some of the content they would come out with, and like, is that even? There's only a few words in that, and like, how do you really sum up what millions of people are born in? Though that. How many days are between?
Yeah, I mean, horoscopes have been around for millennia, really. So there's a lot of there's a lot of information that you can get from horoscopes. But most people look at their sun sign horoscope, which is what they do, because most people look at their season. So they want to know, I'm born in April, so I'm an Aries, or you're born in December, so you're Sagittarius. So most people are looking at that. That is definitely more generic, just because it's not as personalized to you. But a lot of times, if you do get a little bit more into astrology, and not everybody's going to get into astrology more deeper than just knowing that I'm born in this season, I'm probably an Aries, or I'm probably a Taurus, whatever, right? But if you do want to kind of search a little bit deeper, then you want to kind of find out what time you were born. And then that gives you a little bit more of a specificity to that, which is when you can realize your sun, moon, and your rising, because you have not just one sign, you have all the signs and lots of planets in specific signs. And that's what creates the kind of conglomeration of you. And that's what makes you unique, as opposed to not every Sagittarius is like Angelo. Not every Aries is like me. So that's what kind of creates the specificity. So a lot of times I instruct people to look up their sun, moon, and rising, which you can do online for free. You can go to astro.com and type in your birth date, all your birth information. You have to know what time you're born, though, to really get specific in that. And then you can look up your horoscopes. When you're looking at your horoscopes, a lot of times people tend to resonate more with their rising or ascendant sign. They're generic, yes. That's kind of their design, because most people don't know their astrology. Most people don't know that there's anything more to astrology than your sun sign. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, anything beyond that. So yeah, I mean, but horoscopes have been around since astrology really, not since astrology began, because astrology began as astronomy and then taking meaning and extracting meaning and symbolism and archetypes from the astronomy of everything. But after that, then horoscopes started to be written up, and you would have a consulting astrologer that would tell you at this point in your life certain things are going to happen, and at this point in your life certain other things are going to happen, and this is what's going on this year, and so on and so forth. So and that's kind of what created the more mainstream modern upheaval of astrology within the last 100 years or so, of people getting back into that stuff, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. Helps me pay my bills.
So generally speaking, and I don't know if you're able to give a general answer to this, but because every newspaper is different. Let's say like a generic newspaper horoscope. What does it get right, and what can it generally leave out?
Well, it leaves out most of the specificity. Like, if a newspaper says, Aries, you could get a good business opportunity this week, it's like, okay, but I could get a good business opportunity any week. Come to me, and I could do that. So on one hand, you could say that's pretty generic and, yada, yada. It's not very specific. That being said, when you start to learn more about your astrology, you start to learn what's called the big three in astrology, which is your sun, your moon, and your rising sign, or your ascendant. And you start looking at horoscopes with those three signs. You start to kind of get more of a feel for that. So it feels more specific in that way. So sun signs are supposed to be generic because it's kind of supposed to be things that almost everybody could resonate with. For me specifically, though, I am the unique person. Not really unique. About half of us are this way as well, but I was born at night. So when people are born in the day, they tend to resonate more with their sun sign. Tend to, not all the time. And when people are born at night, they tend to resonate more with their moon sign. So looking at the astrology, that's why astrology is usually hit or miss, with those horoscopes and stuff. People either are like, yeah, that makes sense, or nah, I don't resonate with that. And for me, that was always the case. I would read Aries and I don't really resonate with that, and then I found out there's a lot more to it than just that. And the obsessive rabbit hole began.
How specific is too specific in a consulting astrologer in the modern day?
How specific is too specific? Well, I think too specific is when you kind of give someone in a sense, a boundary of saying, this is going to happen to you, period. As opposed to, for me, I don't see astrology as causational, meaning that I don't see astrology as Saturn caused this bad thing to happen in your life. I don't see it like that. I see it as reflectional. So, you're going through some shit. Well, you just also happen to be going through a Saturn transit, which happens to be looking a little challenging for you, and you have to kind of go through that. So too specific is not, I would say when an astrologer is specifically saying, you're going to break up with your partner during this period of time, a lot of times when as an astrologer I see Uranus or Saturn in the 7th house, which is the house of relationships in astrology, I would say, oh, well, there's going to be some relationship challenges. Does that mean that someone's going to break up? No, you're not psychic. And I think that's a big thing. So when astrologers kind of go the psychic route of trying to say this is how it's going to be. As astrologers, we're more witnesses to the events that are happening, just like you are. You're the ones that are experiencing it, and we're trying to witness it, observe it, and then give some sort of meaning to you so that you can feel more comfortable going through whatever experience you're going through. Whether that means that you need to be prepared for some challenges that are happening, you know, objectively, or whether that means that you need to be more open to some opportunities that are coming your way. Either way, you have to be aware of those things. But for me to say, this is going to happen as an astrologer, and I make predictions, you know, I make pretty sometimes bold predictions, but I tend to really leave it up to the individual because you're living your life. Who am I to say how your life is going to go? I don't know, right? We have free will. We all have free will. We all have the... well, I'm a proponent for the fact that fate exists, but within fate exists free will. So we have choices that lead to various outcomes. Ultimately, it leads to the same place because we're going to the same place at the end of the day, you know? So free will is up to us as the individual. And that is also based on conditioning, which as an astrologer, if you're just doing a one-off consultation with someone, who am I to know? Like, I don't do a full background check of all your conditioning and your childhood. And, you know, it's like, there's not enough time to do that, like a full psychological analysis to say, oh, this person went through this traumatic experience when they were 7 years old. Now, usually there's indicators in the chart where you can mention that. But for me to say specifically, you got abused as your parents, thus you're going to be screwed in your relationships for the rest of your life. How is that beneficial in any way to you as the individual paying me or coming to me, you know?
What do you have to say about the idea that there's destiny, but it's sort of like a choose your own adventure game where you can make choices that either you fulfill the destiny in this lifetime for you or not?
Yeah, so, I mean, destiny, from my perspective, it's up to us to recognize that. It's up to us to, in a sense, awaken to what we would call our destiny or our purpose or our dharma, as they call it in Buddhist traditions. But yeah, we have a lot of flexibility with that. You know, my dharma is ultimately a more macrocosmic thing, whereas my choices moment to moment are more microcosmic. So my choices are ultimately going to influence my dharma or my purpose or my destiny, you could say. But I can also change my destiny, so to speak. I can also change the way that I live my life. I can decide tomorrow that I want to pack all this shit up and move to Bali, you know, and live there forever. You know, I can, and that would completely set me, you know, I'd probably have a similar path to what I would take before, but it'd be very different from the path that I'm currently taking. You know, I'm kind of building my stuff in this area of the world and building the connections and all that. So yeah, there's a lot of leeway that we have. But at the end of the day, like I said, we're all going to the same place. You know, we're all coming back to God in whatever way you want to see that. We're coming back home to where we came from. So we have flexibility, but all in all, yeah, we each have our own destiny. We each have our own dharma that we're destined to unfold in its own way. The Buddha says your purpose is to find your purpose. You know, so that's the real dharma, is the unfolding of that, the experience of that, the moment to moment stuff. You know, it's like who maybe in 20 years you're not going to be doing anything with olive oil. You don't know that, right? Who knows? Maybe you're going to just sell it, right? You don't know. So you may decide you just want to be a monk and live in the Himalayas, you know, or move to Peru and live there, you know, and be a shaman there or something, right? I can see that. Who knows, right? So there's lots of pathways, and I think the sooner that we take full accountability for the fact that we have the power to shift that and change that, because a lot of people feel cursed to their circumstances. A lot of people feel a victim to what's going on and victim to their lives. I am this way. Well, my parents made me this way. As soon as you turn 18, you can't blame your parents anymore. You know, as soon as you move out, it's like, okay, sure, they messed you up. Now what? You know? So that's kind of, yeah, where I stand, at least with the destiny, free will, and dharma and all that stuff. But
Yeah, you may have not cut or caused the cut, but it's your responsibility
to tend to the wound.
Yeah, to heal it.
Yeah. It's like something happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And people are still blaming that past situation for what has happened, as opposed to taking responsibility for how I feel now. You know, what matters? What happened 50 years ago or what happened right now? What's happening right now? You keep bringing that up moment to moment. Well, you're going to suffer moment to moment. You know, it's like constantly putting vinegar on an open wound. It's like, screw you, man. You're over there. You know, it's like, you're the one that's causing this. It's like, no, they're not even doing, they don't even think about you anymore.
No.
You know?
Yeah. People are a victim to their own
circumstances and fears and beliefs, paradigms.
So
it's a touchy subject.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of people get very offended when I talk about this stuff because, you know, it's hard to take responsibility. I know that firsthand, and I'm sure you do as well. You know, like everybody that has taken responsibility for their life knows how hard it is to take responsibility for their life, but nonetheless, they were able to do it. And it's like, if someone out there who had much worse of a circumstance growing up than you did and was able to make it out better than where you are now, I think you're going to be all right, you know?
Even myself today, I still have to, like, what I'm, I guess, proud of myself is that I can, at least maybe not in that exact moment, but shortly after go, you know, hey, like I'll take responsibility for that. You know, whatever sort of has played out in my life is completely my doing. You know, I was not in the right place, in the right mind, own up to it, and then forget about it. Obviously, if it keeps reoccurring or someone's keeps abusing you or something, then you gotta know different. That you gotta make a different move. But
there's some lifestyle choices that often need to be made too. You know, it's like people want to break the chain of abuse. You know, I do a lot of work with relationships, and people want to break a chain of abuse. Well, if you're in an abusive relationship, there's no way you can break the chain of abuse without leaving that, you know? It's like trying to say, oh, well, I'll just work on my stuff and then this person will just stop beating me up. You know, it's like, well, no, you know, you got to leave. And that's part of it's part of the healing experience too, is having the courage to do that for a lot of people. A lot of times we need to move and change our circumstances in order for our circumstances to change, you know? So an uncle of mine once said that if you want the things in your life to change, you're going to have to change the things in your life, you know? And it takes that first step for you to say, I want to do something about this. And then when you have the courage to take that first step, you'll be surprised of how much support you really get. Maybe not by the people and your friends in your life, but by the universe as a whole, or God as a whole, whatever you want to call it.
One of my sayings, or it's mine, I'm coining it as mine, but it's change or be changed.
That's the same thing, exactly.
It's like, it's going to happen either way. I mean, things are either going to get better or they're going to get worse.
Yep.
And obviously, we always want them to get better.
Yeah, in our favor. You know, because it's if you're being changed by your circumstances constantly, it's not in your favor. You know, macroly it is, whether you're aware of it in the moment or not. Sometimes the hardest situations end up being the biggest blessings. In fact, all the time. At least that, from my own experience, that's what I've found. And so yeah, you do have to make that choice, and it is a conscious choice. And that's the element of free will that I like to talk about, because that's what it's all about. It's not about, like, we think that free will means that we play God, and that's not really what it's about, because we're all interconnected. We're all co-creating this dream, you know? But what it is, what free will really is having the choice to say, I can control my behavior. I can control my emotions. I can control and regulate my nervous system, right? I can control and deal and process with my emotions. If you do all that, your life will inevitably change, you know, very, very quickly. And so a lot of times people focus too much on the circumstances and not enough on themselves. Who's creating the circumstances? Are the circumstances creating you, or are you creating the circumstances? And it can't be both. It's got to be one or the other.
I do have a question, actually, that's kind of related to this.
Hit me, young Mike.
You deal in the world of inner work, some could say. And there's this idea of inner work in whatever you want to call it, self-development community, spiritual community. Could you just maybe touch on how the physical reality plays into, and you're talking about changing things in your life, and for example, you know, if a relationship's abusive, just actually leaving it, like literally arranging things in your physical reality, the actual things you can touch and see, circumstances, just actually changing them to, you know, for example, Feng Shui. You set up this loft here in a certain way, in the physical items. This is not all the inner.
No.
You're not in an empty white room, which I'm sure is great.
Yeah.
Right? You have certain things that influence you.
Sure, it's a little crazy too. That's why psychiatric wards are all white rooms, right?
Well, you're just a little bit crazy.
A little crazy. We got the white room.
Yeah. So could you've studied this. So could you talk about physical items and how to arrange those? Not how to arrange those in your life, but why.
Yeah.
Why
well,
it matters, I guess.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's a good question. I think that in general, we have to be aware that a lot of the times the inner work is not just emotional and non-physical. A lot of times it literally requires us changing our habits and our routines, which means changing our physical appearance, which means like if you're a bum every day and you look in the mirror and you feel like a bum because you don't do anything with your appearance, you don't make yourself feel good, well, you're going to feel like a bum no matter what you do, you know? And yeah, you could spend 5 years in meditation and maybe you could still, by the end of that, look like a bum but not feel like a bum. But it's a lot easier to change how you feel when you kind of can rearrange the outer experience a bit. So yeah, in my experience, a lot of the times when I've kind of gone through little realizations that I need to make some changes and stuff, it starts with cleaning myself up. It starts with cleaning my space up, making sure that I have a nice, clean space, you know? If you have, and actually, Mike was one of the guys I remember like a while back, one of the first times you came over to my house, you were just like going off to me about, I had like cups and just shit everywhere, right? Like just lazy, you know, not putting stuff away and having like old cans and stuff around, you know. And he's like, oh, this is so easy, Virgo. So he's you know, and I'm like, okay, it is what it is, you know. But I just realized, you know, when you take the time to kind of clean that up, you just feel better.
It sends subconscious signals to you about the kind of person that you are.
It does. No, I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that's also why I was resistant to it in the beginning, for sure. You know, I was like, oh, what the hell are you talking about, man? I like it messy, you know. No, I like it organized. I have lots of shit everywhere, but it's organized, and that's how I flow, you know. Like there's lots of knickknacks and stimuli as you guys walked in. You're like, oh, you know, but it's organized and it's clean and there's a good flow to it. So yeah, I mean, in order to change your circumstances, you have to change your circumstances. You have to change, you know, you have to make some arrangements. So a lot of times that just could be something as simple as getting rid of old shit. You know, that's a great thing that everyone should do at least once a year, to just get rid of old things that you don't need anymore. Why not? You know, you can go hardcore and get into feng shui and stuff. One of my good friends recently introduced me to bagua, which is a desk feng shui, you know, feng shui of your workspace, and certain corners mean certain things. It's all broken up into like 9 different kind of squares or octagons. It's actually an octagon, but yeah, so I think that's a very important thing, you know, because like,
what is
as
feng shui
within,
for the people that don't know? How do you describe it?
Well, feng shui is just the I guess it would be the art of the energy flow of a space. So directing certain things, having certain aspects of your space set up in a way that allows the energy to flow in a positive way, meaning that you don't have a bunch of clutter in a corner where stuff is just building, energy is building up, you know, because energy is very important element to space. You know, you could have a very ugly space, but have really good energy in it. And you could have a very clean, beautiful, luxurious space, but just have gross energy into it. So Feng Shui is about the energy flow. Like I know people that get paid like, you know, thousands of dollars to just come in for like less than an hour and help people do Feng Shui, you know, in their home and stuff. So yeah, I think that's very important. And, you know, if you're into kind of natural, like Qigong and all that stuff, you're aware that, you know,
my master does Feng Shui. Yeah. They teach it as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
You know, everything from symmetry and even like picking your house.
Yeah.
On the
numbers,
street.
the streets, the location of the street, the location of the house on the street, how many trees are on your property. You know, there's so many different variables there of the energy flows that most people aren't aware of.
I never knew Feng Shui before I felt Feng Shui. Like I was just, as a kid, I sort of like took after my mom and always wanted things like neat and tidy and organized, and my dad was like the total opposite. And that just like always bugged me, and I'd always like, you know, clean and organize his truck up, and no matter what, you know, I love the guy or whatever, but you know, a week later the truck is like a disaster again. I just feel that it's, your exterior world is sort of a representation of your inner world, and that's not always the case. I mean, I see, you know, a lot of successful people, but I don't know much more about, you know, deep into their lives, but maybe they're miserable or depressed or whatever. But it just sort of see like certain artists that I see, and it's like you can't have a Michelangelo unless he's very detailed and specific to be able to create something that is so powerful and unique. And like certain chefs that I see, there's ones that are like extremely meticulous, and you know, they're looking at your uniform, and I'm like, what did you like? Did you order out tonight? Because it doesn't look like you cooked. There's like nothing on his uniform, but it's like
keep it clean.
Keeping it clean, like it's, for me, it's important, and it affects my mind, my well-being, as much as, I mean, that's been tested a little bit for me recently, and I just had to, you know, accept certain things and just learn how to deal with it and grow and you know, hopefully help other people out in that. And that's just, to me, it's funny that we got on this topic, but it's like, that to me is like extremely important. I have my space, and as long as I find like I at least try to keep my bedroom always pristine, and then as long as I can have a safe space to go into and go like, okay, everything just feels like it's in the right place. And I have this idea of like, you know, I can see it. I can just feel the furniture. If that desk or that chair isn't sitting in the right position, I have to go over and like move it. And then
who's the Virgo here?
Yeah, he has some Virgo planets.
Oh, he does, yeah.
That's right. You know more about my chart than I do.
That's right. I have it saved in your business file.
Incredible.
I know how to navigate it.
I have it too saved on my old phone that's lost in the jungle.
Because I think a lot of people that don't consciously know this, like, you know, that, you know, when you feel in a situation why something, you know, this just feels right, or this just feels like a perfect moment sitting in this chair in this room right now, but I don't know why. It's like the angles of these things, very specific.
Yeah. Or you guys just come in and you're like, dang, it feels good in here, you know, it's a vibe. It's the same thing, you know?
Angelo, I think you're underplaying the fact that you've had a color-coded closet for 20 years. You didn't mention that. You said
longer than that.
Yeah.
Longer than 20 years.
Well, I did a little bit of Army Cadets, and I had this before Army Cadets, but it's just like, you know, I always organized. After Halloween, I organized all my candies so that I just knew which ones I had, so I could plan it out and made sure I had a Tootsie Roll left till the end, you know. I just like, and my mom obviously, you know, recognizes this stuff, and I even had like, you know, my closet was sort of a spectacle at some point, and people wanted to check out my closet.
Come look at Angelo's closet.
It's pretty good now that I got a larger closet, and you know, one of my weaknesses is like clothing, and I recently was in Peru and I picked up all this colorful clothing. I'm like, where the fuck is this gonna fit in my closet? Because it's like a rainbow of colors. But it's just for me it's I mean, I love spontaneity, and I love to be like off the cuff and crazy or whatever, but there's some part of me that's just like, you know, you go into nature and it's like, that's, for me, that's perfect. Like, I wouldn't want to move that tree, but I don't know, in sort of like our human, our like constructed world that we live in, and like being in whatever, in a city or in a home or something that isn't completely natural, although I think everything's natural. It's just like, yeah, that the color of that chair needs to be a certain color, it needs to be facing a certain way, and just, to me, it feels right. And I can feel, I mean, doing demos and standing behind a demo table and just observing everything you possibly can observe about someone. When they're stepping up to the table, how far away do they notice you at the table?
Mm-hmm.
Are they looking with both eyes? Are they completely zoned in? Do they walk up and just look at one item coming up to the table? Are they looking at the entire table? Are they looking at your eyes? What are they carrying in their cart? How are they dressed? What's in their cart? Like, you're like, and that's what I found. I didn't even notice I was doing this until like maybe a few years of actually doing demos, and I've been doing demos for a long time, but it's just like really a study of human behavior and just seeing, like, again, every possible thing that they could be doing and noticing. So I would always change the order of certain things on the table, stagger the colors, make sure, like, you could just, as simple as having 4 bottles or 8 bottles on the table, there's so many different things you can do. You can change the shape of the bowls, and there's a different reaction that you'll have. I mean, not always, but it was funny, like a certain time, and when we changed our labels, there was a certain question that people always had. It was the same question, like, and literally, when you talk to hundreds of people and they have that same question, it's just like something clicked off in my head. I'm like, yeah, I got to change something on that label so that they're not asking that question anymore. Because there's something is not, they're not reading it, or it's not bold enough, or whatever it is. And it's just like, and then that's even more, I became even more, I don't know, detailed to like, well, labels especially, because that's, you know, all the products we put out, like they get, I'm like the last filter before they get launched onto the market, and it's just
green
like
thumb.
Yeah, the green thumb too.
Or the red thumb.
My sister-in-law, I think, got annoyed with me at the beginning because we were going through this process, and I'm like, yeah, the 500 mil on there needs to be like a couple of points bigger because it's not quite balanced with the flag on the other side, and people are looking, and then we're going to look for that side, and it's like certain details like that, and it's just like, what? We got to change that, and it's like, yeah, it's just like, I just can feel that it's not right. And then we make the change, and
that was amazing.
It was amazing. Sales skyrocket.
Yeah, of course.
But changing colors, though, that's a big one, or making colors more bold. And I mean, I love colors.
Symbols. I remember the first time we met, you were going over those designs for the Saturna.
Yeah, that's right.
And Sol and Luna.
Our biodynamic line, yeah. It's got all the planetary symbols on it.
There we go.
Great segue. You're a genius.
Tell me that wasn't an alignment.
Yeah, that was definitely an alignment. Yeah.
I brought all those up.
Yeah, you brought all those up. We got to try them all, which is great. And then,
and I didn't know you. I didn't know I'd be traveling with a hardcore astrologer.
Yeah. Some things
Astrology.
are just divinely aligned, you know?
Yeah, there was a lot of things that happened that weekend, and I could have sworn you were psychic. I mean, there were certain things that I'd always be looking for, and I don't know what it was. Some little things, or in the kitchen. I know in the kitchen, like some of us, like we got to that one place there, and the kitchen exploded basically with everybody in there. I'm like, well, where's the lid to the? Oh, you did it.
It'd be like across the room. You're like, it's in the far corner of the on the right side of the sink.
And I can recognize a mess and when things are organized, and I couldn't find it, and I have a pretty sharp eye to notice things, and I walked around the place like 5 times, and like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, oh yeah, last time I asked Will, I went up to Will, I'm like, Will, where's the salt lid? And you found, like, it was right on the table. I'm like, but it was like, it wasn't right in the open either.
That's funny. Always growing up, I get like a text or whatever from my brother. He'd be like, hey, do you have like an extra paperclip? I'm like, yeah. If you look on the right leg of my desk, you're going to find one on the floor. It's right there. You just got to pick it up. It's good. It's been there for like 2 weeks. I got it. And where's the notepad? Bottom drawer, on the right hand. It's like, that's my life. It's like, it seems messy. And that's actually something that I was going to say about, you're talking about nature. without you kind of see it all and you don't want to improve it, it's like it seems chaotic, but there's like a real kind of order to it all. You know, there's a flow to it all, and I think that's kind of, in my experience, that's kind of what reality looks like. It seems on like the base level to be utter chaos. You know, it seems to be just crazy, and there almost seems to be like just so much going on that you can't make any correlations or see any patterns. But if you look closely enough, you do see those patterns. And I mean, that's something that I really have appreciated about, and I think one of the reasons why I got into astrology was because it was a way for me to be able to perceive those patterns throughout people and throughout situations and throughout world events and throughout all of history, you know, be able to witness.
Or the stars. Like, I look up into the stars and like, I always try to see what they're saying or what's going on, but like there's certain times where I can look up, and I don't know when it was exactly, but I look up and then I can actually, like, this is at the grand picture of the solar or of all the stars in the sky, all the constellations, and it's just like I actually can see like a swirl, like some sort of swirling pattern. I'm like looking twice. I'm like, whoa, I've never seen that before. Like, what? Like, I don't know if that's like a thing or not, but I'm like, obviously you can see triangles everywhere and all the shapes you can possibly imagine, but there's times where I look up and I see a pattern, which you don't really get that.
I think it's all there. It's just about, are you keen enough to be able to see it? You know, it's like, why did collectives of ancients be able to look at the same star pattern and see a similar animal or some sort of similar structure and be able to extrapolate that from that? You know, it wasn't just one culture that said, this is that, this is that. No. They all had, some of them were different, you know, like, well, maybe one's a snake and the other's a dragon, you know, but it's like, is that really that much different? You know, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, because it does all seem chaotic, but it's not really, you know, there's a divine order to it all. And, but you have to know what to look for. And I think that's the work, you know, is being able to attune yourself to be able to see those patterns, whether that's through astrology, whether that's through just fine details, or whether that's through your clothing, you know, or whether that's through nature and seeing the pattern of the trees. And so there's lots of patterns and lots of ways of perceiving those patterns. And I think that's what gives us a feeling of meaning in the world, you know. I think when we're able to recognize ourselves as a part of those patterns, and we're able to kind of even be the observer of the patterns, which I think makes humans very, I guess, stand out from the rest of nature in many ways, is that we're able to, and I'm sure all nature perceives very different patterns than we do, but I think the way in which we perceive patterns and the variety of the ways in which we perceive patterns, whether that's through language or astronomy or mathematics or science or Fibonacci or our color, sound, you know, music. There's so many ways that we as humans were able to create a sense of order out of the chaos. And if you look, it's there, you know, seek and you shall find.
Does every star and every planet, it's something I always thought, you know, I feel like everything has an effect on everything. So, but in astrology, you obviously have limits, because you can't be looking at, there's too many cycles, there's too many stars, there's too many, well, other planets and moons and all this sort of stuff.
Every year there's asteroids and minor planetary bodies that are being discovered that some astrologer out there is trying to figure out its meaning and how it incorporates into the chart, but there's a limit to how relevant any of that actually is, you know. I have no doubt that everything has an effect on us, and everything influences us in some way, but there's a limit to that, you know. And I think a limit to where it's practical and applicable, and that's what I'm about, you know. I don't want to, like, I don't care what that one asteroid that no one's heard about is doing in your chart if it isn't doing anything meaningful, you know.
So I mean, it's probably safe to assume that the largest celestial bodies are going to have the most influence.
Yes, the largest, and I would say the closest to us. Thus
Right,
our
the
solar
largest,
system.
the closest, and the ones that we can see with the naked eye.
Yes, not always, because we cannot see Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto with our naked eye. Yet they have a very significant effect on us, and also us collectively, not just us as individuals.
So the natal chart, so your astrology, your natal chart is taken from the moment your body, your baby self,
come out the womb,
enters the world.
Yep.
Feet are out, boom, they get the time,
That's
and then
it.
that's the reading you're gonna have.
Yeah.
Silly question. Does it apply to like animals as well? Can you?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, again, it's less relevant to animals because most animals are not self-aware like we are. You know, most animals are conscious, but not with the level of consciousness that we are. You know, it's very different. Resonance is a very different frequency. Most animals are focused on survival, eating, fucking, pooping. You know, finding a good place for shelter and to make babies and then die, and hope that those babies live. Humans, we're questioning the meaning of life, and we're making art, and we're making music, and we're writing mathematical equations, and we're focused on a lot of different things that are very much more specific than just the basic mechanisms of our biology, right? And that's where kind of astrology comes in. And, you know, to me, it's the study of relationships, but not just human relationships, also relationships to ourself and the cosmos, and within ourselves and outside of ourselves, and how it all correlates together. But the macro study of that we call astrology, of how those planetary bodies out there reflect what's going on down here. Because there is a correlation. They discovered that quite a long time ago. That, hey, not only are these beautiful stars beautiful, they have an influence on us. And I say influence very lightly because, like I said, I don't believe that astrology is causational. I don't believe that Mars is in this way. It's causing you to be this way. You know, at the end of the day, you're in control of who you are. You can't blame it on the planets. You know, a lot of people like to take the responsibility away by saying, oh, it was that, oh, I had Mars in my whatever house. You know, it's like, yeah, you're going to go through events, but how you experience those events, even if someone has almost an identical chart to you, versus how someone with that same identical chart, like identical twins is a good example of this, where generally they have pretty much the same. Sometimes they can have different, very different aspects, but very, very rarely. Oftentimes it's pretty much the exact same chart. Their ascendant might be off a few degrees, but that barely means much, you know. But they live very different lives. And so they activate certain things. They have different conditionings. They have different tendencies because your natal chart, or the moment that you're born, defines the kind of potential of the energy in which you, or you could say the archetype of which you are. But I always joke about, and this came from a pretty well-known astrologer named Stephen Forrest, and he says, you know, I hope that since you've been born, you've grown a little bit since then, meaning that you're not cursed to what you have been when you were born. You know, this is not who I am. It is the essence of who you are, and it's the potential of who you are. But even as we go about each year, there's different things happening collectively, planetarily, that are impacting you each year. That this year, for example, is a very intense year. It's a very crazy year. Lots of things going on. And that's going to affect us more than many of the other years, you know? And some people this year had a very profound year, and other people had a very, very challenging year. Some people both. Some people neither, you know? So that all depends on, the moment that you're born really defines that. It is, in a sense, you get a stamp the moment you come out of the womb, and that is your, what we call in astrology, the natal chart, which is your the energy of who you are. It's the potential of who you are.
One thing I remember discussing with somebody about astrology, and, you know, sort of, I guess, trying to convince them that, you know, astrology is real, and I feel like it represents, I don't know, I feel like it's like the original religion. And the one, I made a couple of points. The one was like the moon, and a lot of people know the effects of the moon. the lunar cycle and
tides and planets.
Yeah, and how it changes massive bodies of water, and humans are made up of water.
Yep,
So
70+%
over
water.
70%, maybe even more, according to some. And if it has that effect on tides, and it obviously, whoa, what's going on? Look at that magnetism. It has the effect on bodies of water that large. Well, what else is it doing to our bodies, our brain?
Yeah, we're over 70%
our
water.
Emotions.
Exactly.
And we know that. We know, like, I've talked to people that work in, like, in security center or jails or whatever it is, and there's the inmates go a little more crazy, and murder rates go up. Things like happen on the full moon, that don't normally happen. Hey, let's take care of business here. Absolutely. Happy 2021. So yeah, let's just break it down for those who might be new to astrology. Like what's your sun sign? What's your ascendant? What are you looking at on the chart? What are these conjunctions and
well, without getting too we're not even gonna go there yet. Right, we'll just talk about the planets, because that's,
I know a little bit more than
starting.
I thought.
Yeah, no. A lot. We've done a lot of readings and stuff, so you're very well educated. But the average person, like I said, they mostly they don't even know it's their sun sign. It's just their star sign, which is their zodiac sign, which is just the one sign. Like I said, we all have 12 signs in our natal chart, and we have 12 houses. Each of the houses indicates a specific area of your life, and having different planets in each of those houses indicates various kind of combinations of energy and how that impacts you. So to start is like I said in the beginning, the big three, which is the sun, the moon, and the rising or the ascendant. So your sun sign is the sun takes about 30 days to transit through each sign. So thus you share the same season with quite a bit of people. And your sun represents vitality, it represents your personality, it represents your ego, represents who you are on the more personality level. So kind of day-to-day interactions when you allow the ego to come out. Your moon sign moon comes out at night. Moon sign represents the unconscious. It represents your emotions. It represents your emotional body, so how you interact with emotions, how you process emotions. Also represents your childhood. It represents conditioning from a baby. And it also represents in general, your conditioning. So the way that I kind of like to describe the three is your moon sign represents home, where you come from. And your sun sign is the vehicle, which is taking you to your desired destination. Your desired destination is what we call the rising sign or the ascendant in astrology. So that's, in a sense, you could say what we're here to learn in this lifetime, or what we're growing into, what we're rising up into, or what we're ascending up into. And so you can kind of put it all together, and you are, in a sense, moving away from a lot of the tendencies of the moon. Those are habits, our unconscious habits, our emotions, our conditioned habits. We're moving away from that. But just because you're leaving home doesn't mean that you completely remove all attachments from home. You still have many amazing values that you learn from your parents that are never going to go away. But you don't need to take everything that's in your home with you. When you go on an adventure, or when you move to a new place, you don't take your entire contents of your home and move into the next, or your parents' home at least. And your sun sign, like I said, it's a vehicle. So it's what's taking you from A to B. So the sun is always there. It's your personality. The sun, it really represents that which is always generating. It's always staying the same. The moon waxes and wanes, right? We have new moons, which goes dark. We have full moons where it's bright. So there's constant cycles. The tides go in, the tides go out. The emotional and the conditioning is always changing, right? We have our core conditioning that we accumulate as a kid, and then that as we grow, as we become more conscious, we change the relationship with that conditioning, right? We have different relationships with that. We let go of some of that, hopefully. Not everybody, but oftentimes we let go of a lot of that. We grow, we adapt, we become more conscious, and we realize that most of that doesn't serve us anymore. There's some core things that do serve us, our core tendencies. You know, it's like, okay, if you grew up around a very family-oriented household, you're probably gonna, no matter, you know, what happens in the future, you're probably gonna be a very family-oriented person. If you grew up in a household that was perhaps very cold and not very touchy-feely, not very, you know, overly emotional, and your parents didn't really express emotions, well, you're probably gonna carry that into your adult life as well. The sun, though, it represents that which is kind of unchanging. The sun itself doesn't go dim, it just disappears, right? It disappears on the axis. It's always sunny somewhere in the world, right? at some time, except temporarily on eclipses. That's another another story. But so the sun represents that vitality, that's which is constantly happening, meaning your personality, your ego is always there. It's always going to be there. It's never going away. There's no such thing as getting rid of the ego, right? It's just managing it and not letting it always, it doesn't always have to take the center stage. Yes, so evil. The ego, saying the ego is evil is the ego. That's the funny part. That damn ego, it's always in the way. It's like, who's talking? Hey, ego. What's up, bro? Right, so.
Oh, I like that.
So yeah, that's kind of the way that I describe it when I'm doing consultations and stuff with people who have never really thought about that, or newbies. And then we go to our destination, which is our rising sign. So our rising sign changes every 2 hours. That's why the time of birth that you were born matters. And that's also, not only does the rising sign change, sometimes when you're born on a cusp, there's no such thing as cusps in astrology. The cusp is the day, which doesn't really matter, because in astrology it's all mathematics, it's degrees. Right. So I could be born in the evening on a cusp, and someone could be born in the morning, and we would have different sun signs. And we may have different moon signs, and most likely we'll have different rising signs, all in the same day. And if any other planets happen to change that day, we'll also have very different charts, despite being born on the same day, right, in the same year. So that's where astrology gets really specific, right? And you can have someone that may think they're an Aries and they're reading horoscopes for an Aries, but they're actually a Taurus, just because they're born on that cusp and they're not quite sure which is which. And they may go their whole life kind of reading both of them and not really resonate with either of them because they're unaware of all the other elements of that. So yeah, that's the kind of the picture that I like to describe is we're leaving our home, we're leaving our moon sign, we're leaving a lot of the tendencies of that, the unconscious stuff, the negative stuff, the stuff that's no longer serving us, and we're utilizing our personality, our ego, our vitality, our sun, to take us to the destination. Now, notice the sun is a vehicle, meaning it's not the destination. Ego is not the destination. Ego gets us to the destination. Our personality takes us to the destination. It itself is not the destination. A lot of people live in that place where either the comfort zone is the destination, their home, their moon, their unconscious tendencies, or they kind of leave that all or deny that, which is usually the case, and they just completely go into full personality, full ego, and they come off as this egotistical, kind of confident asshole. And that's not it either. You know, you're still missing the picture, which is that there's somewhere to go. Now, in the macro sense, there's nowhere to go, nowhere to be, nothing to do, just being. But in the context of which I'm describing, there is a destination, and we need to consciously work towards that destination in order to really, you could say, evolve or get the most out of our life. Or we were talking about destiny and dharma before. That's what it is. It really represents that which we're coming here to learn in many regards. So that's what our rising sign represents. It on the base level, it represents how we look as well. So you can usually tell people, not usually by their sun sign, but usually you can tell people's rising sign a lot better just based on their physical appearance.
Oh, really? As
that rules their physical appearance. Yeah.
The sun sign.
Rising.
The rising.
Yeah, your ascendant. So usually I'm pretty good at guessing people's ascendants. That's kind of how I give the description of the big three. And that's what really matters when you're getting into astrology, because you don't want to get too complicated. It doesn't really, all that other stuff, it matters when you're getting a professional like me to run through your stuff and you're paying someone to, you know, tell you about it. But when you're just discovering it for yourself, or you're just trying to figure out what this is all about, just knowing those big three really changes the game. You know, just knowing what those mean and how those impact you. You know, knowing that you have your sun in this placement and you have your moon in this placement and you have your rising in this sign, well, that really changes the whole outlook, because now you're not just the one sign anymore, which is what a lot of people think they are. I'm just an Aries, but I never resonate with Aries. I don't know why. Well, you know, for me, that was a big one, because my moon is in Cancer and I have a Pisces rising. Both of them are water signs, right? As opposed to, I hear the impulsive, outrageous, aggressive Aries, and I never really resonated with that as a kid. Usually when we're kids, by the way, we tend to operate more or less from the moon sign, until we reach the kind of self-aware stage around 11 or so, usually around 11 or 12, which is our first Jupiter return. And that's when we start to activate our sun sign. We start to have our own personality. We start to kind of separate from mom and dad and realize that we're not an extension of our mother anymore, and we kind of have our own thoughts, and we think we're right, and we think we know everything. That kind of goes on for some time until we get humbled. Again, these are all astrological cycles, and we all have those same cycles in our lives, which is cool, and which is what makes us human and also connected.
And this might be useful to point out, the big three are the big three because they are the ones that change the fastest, thereby the most personal?
Yes. So, yeah, like I said, the rising sign changes every 2 hours. The moon sign changes every
So
two
the sun's
and a half
moving
days,
through each sign.
once a month.
So
The
your
sun changes signs once a month.
Oh,
So the sun moves 1 degree a day, and there's 30 degrees per sign.
Right.
So approximately 1 month. The moon takes about 1 month, 28 days for a lunar cycle, full moon to full moon, 28 days. 2 weeks, new moon to full moon. Thus, it's about 2.5 days or so, just less than 2.5 days, that the moon changes signs. So the moon will be in one sign and go to the next every just less than 3 days.
3 days.
And then the rising or the ascendant, if you think about when the sun sets and rises every day, which is represented by the ascendant, well, the sun moves quite a bit in a day,
Right.
you know, and thus the ascendant moves quite a bit in a day. It moves every 2 hours. Every 2 hours it will change signs.
Right. There's 12 signs, so 24 hours in a day.
Again, that's approximate just because of the way that the constellations are. For example, Pisces is a bigger constellation. Thus, Pisces, the ascendant being in Pisces is usually a longer time period. So it's not exactly 2 hours, as one would like to think. There's some leeway for each of those.
And so what's the next closest? Is it Mars?
Mercury is the next. Mercury also moves approximately 1 degree a day. It follows the sun pretty closely. And Mercury represents communication in astrology. It represents travel, short-term travel. And it represents messages and your mind, and how your mind operates, how your mind works, how you express yourself. And then we have Venus, which is a planet of love. It's a planet of desire. It's a planet of money, prosperity, abundance. The things that we desire to have, the things that we want, the things that we need. Mars is the next planet in order. And Mars represents our masculine side. So Venus tends to represent our feminine side. Similarly, the sun and the moon also represent feminine and masculine in some regard. But Venus represents more of our, you could say, I guess, conscious feminine, or what we're wanting in relationships. And Mars represents what we're embodying in relationships, or it represents our sexual energy. It represents our sexual desires. It represents how we express our anger, how we express our aggression, how we express our masculine. So in women, actually, Venus represents more or less what they embody in relationships, and Mars tends to represent in a woman's chart what qualities or traits she desires from her man or from her partner, and it's vice versa for men. So men their Venus tends to represent what they're desiring out of their partner, what they're desiring, and then Mars represents what they embody in relationships, or tend to embody in relationships dynamics. So yeah, those are the main kind of what we call the inner planets, or the personal planets. And then we get into the outer planets. Next we have Jupiter, jovial Jupiter, which represents expansion. It represents abundance. It represents our career, what we expand into. Represents our higher learning of, higher education. And it represents our kind of transactions. It represents outer transactions. Venus is more or less, when I say Venus is associated with money, it's more or less the personal transactions, meaning that, I'm receiving this money from my job, or I'm receiving this gift of money from someone. Whereas Jupiter would represent in someone's chart more or less their job itself, or their boss, and what they're desiring from a more career standpoint as well. Saturn is the next in line, and Saturn represents our boundaries. It represents our restrictions. Saturn represents and symbolizes in our chart everything that kind of restricts us or makes us feel stagnant, aka the hardest lessons that we tend to have to learn. Saturn also represents the father in our chart, whereas the moon represents the mother. So when we look at childhood, we want to look at Saturn and the moon for both of those reasons. Yeah, so we have Saturn, which, as I said, represents boundaries. It represents restrictions. It represents the challenges in life. It represents our challenging lessons. Saturn and Mars are what are known as the malefics, and Jupiter and Venus are what are known as the benefics. So malefics meaning they usually create challenges, or usually are challenging to fully activate or work with. Benefics meaning they usually bless us in some way. They're usually bringing us some sort of blessing or benefit, whereas Saturn tends to be seen as the kind of Big Daddy Saturn who's coming to whoop your butt. And a big interesting aspect of Saturn is Saturn represents maturity as well. And every single one of us goes through what's called our Saturn return, which is around the age of 27 to 30 when we go through our real maturity. Our coming of age in the West is 18, which find me a mature 18-year-old out there and I will be appalled. It's not really a rite of maturity. You don't really become mature until you're in your late 20s and you kind of start to get your life figured out and get on your path, and that's when most people are going through their Saturn returns, which can be challenging times for some people.
I know I haven't gone through my Saturn return yet. Jeez.
Your wrinkles say otherwise.
What? EVO twice a day, man.
Twice a day. It's just the lighting. I can see it really good, It's because your skin's so clear. So yeah, Saturn represents, like I said, the challenges out of life and maturity as well. It's like, fine wine. It takes a little while to age, just like Angelo here, fine wine over here. And so yeah, a lot of people kind of give Saturn and Mars a bad rep, but I don't really believe that we grow through moments of good times. I think we grow the most through difficult times and challenging times that inspire us to kind of say, hey, I better take a look at my life and what's going on. I better make some changes. It's not, when things are going good, usually we're not making important changes. We're just like, everything's good. Why would I want to change anything about what's going on right now?
Actually, I was just going to say, with what's been going on in 2020, or like I was having a great time, and I still am, but there was definitely challenges that came up because I was going through it and going like, how is this possible that, so many people are going through this fear and whatever. I'd be interested to see what my Saturn was doing, I guess. But and then up came other challenges that I didn't expect, and one was the main one was being able to connect with a certain individual who I hold closely to my heart. That was like,
just say it.
My girlfriend.
Wow.
And that brought out all this sort of fear of like when and how and if, and like, oh my gosh, and like reaching out to so many different
astrologers, psychics, tarot readers,
whatever I could like grasp at to like give me the answers.
Wise men.
But actually through that all, though, what I learned was that And I think this sort of speaks to like the representation of the astral world and the inner world, and being perhaps a reflection, but yeah, to go inward, to find out if, how, and when, and if you really want it to happen, or if it's something that you truly need or desire, and it end up happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, whether you're looking through the lens of astrology, or whether you're looking through the lens of Chinese medicine, or whether you're looking through the lens of shamanism, or whether you're looking through the lens of just the day-to-day life, like when we come to the realization that nothing out there is going to give us all the answers, at the end of the day, all that stuff out there can guide us, and all that stuff out there can show us signs and give us that validation and give us the you got it, keep going, or you should make some changes, you're not really going on the right path. But we already know that, inside of ourselves. And a lot of the reason that people, one of the biggest feedback that I get when I work with clients for astrology is, it's crazy because it's like, you just told me everything that I knew in my head, that I already knew about myself, but I just was never able to put into words, or I was never able to really understand. And that's because they already knew that, but they just needed someone like a catalyst like me to come and say that to them, and then for them to be like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense, It's like, of course it makes sense, because you already knew it, And so that's why, like, even as an astrologer, I'm not like a lot of astrologers, because I don't think that I'm really even doing anything, I really feel like I'm just saying what you already know, but you need to hear it in the way that I say it, because, how often do we share advice with someone that we ourselves have difficulty accepting and taking as our own? It's much more difficult to take our own advice than it is to hear the same advice that we already knew, packaged in a beautiful way, many ways.
Maybe you paid for it too.
Maybe you paid for it. In fact, usually when you pay for it, you listen. You don't really listen when it's free. You're like, oh, what the hell is that guy talking about? But then you cough up some dough and you're like, oh, wow, this guy knows everything. I wonder why that is, But I think it's just a level of seriousness too. It's not really about the money. It's just, because there's people that I've done free readings for that had the same level of seriousness as someone who invested in a reading, because they were just committed to, like, they really were ready for it. Whereas other people, that sometimes people have even paid for stuff and they didn't really, they didn't really let it sink in because they didn't have that seriousness. It was more just like, I'll entertain the idea. It's like, well, entertain yourself, you don't need to pay me to entertain you, like I can do that for free online, watch my videos, So yeah, and then we have what's called the outer planets, or what's called the trans-Neptunians, or the transpersonal planets, which are more collective planets because they're very, very slow moving. After Saturn's pretty slow moving too. It takes about 28 years to complete a full, we'll go through all the signs. So Saturn spends about 3 years in each of the sign, and after that, then these are more what's called the generational planets, which means that we have Neptune in a sign, that's a generation. We have Uranus in a sign, that's a smaller generation, and we have Pluto in a sign, that's a bigger generation. So these are where we as kind of generations come in to influence the world in different ways. For example, the Pluto in Leo generation was the crazy 60s revolution, right? They really came in and stood up to authority and started saying no to what the government was doing. Mind you, they kind of just let it all go. But the next generation was the Pluto and Virgo generation, which was a generation about organization and the systems and all that stuff. So it kind of makes sense, actually, if you look at it from an astrological lens, why the 60s happened and kind of just seemed to go away almost, where we just went into this corporate structure of the 70s and the 80s of strive to the top again and try and be the best and all that stuff. So, the outer planets symbolize things to us personally, but they also more or less represent generations of people coming in to the world and influencing the world in different ways. So in your own natal chart, though, Uranus represents spontaneity. It represents change, rapid change, quick changes, and it really represents your higher mind, or you could say your consciousness of like the soul memory, so to speak. Neptune represents unconditional love. It represents delusion, represents illusion, and how that plays out in your life. And it also represents your connection with spirituality.
And this is Neptune?
Neptune, yeah. And then Pluto represents long-term change, and it represents Pluto takes big things and makes them small. You can kind of think of Pluto as resonant of the atomic era. Actually, Pluto was discovered in the atomic era, right as around the time we discovered the atomic bomb and splitting the atom. So Pluto really represents breaking things apart and expanding upon great concepts. So when you look at it from a generational perspective, we see different generations kind of come in with almost different missions where, you can recognize that, your year alone is a generation in itself, and that year is actually usually a Jupiter cycle. Jupiter stays in the signs for about a year. And so usually you tend to have some sort of connection with the people that were born in the same year as you, for more reasons than just that, but that's usually one of the reasons. Then, if you look at the generations that are within, 6 to 7 years, which is approximately a Uranus sign transit, you tend to also resonate with that generation. That's kind of what we call the little mini generations within a generation. And then you have Neptune generations, which are what we'd see as the millennials, the Gen Z, Gen X, whatever you want to call them. They have all, I don't even know half the names now. So many names, right? But
the Corona crew.
beep, beep. Beep, 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 beep. We're censored. No. Fake news. Pluto generations are more bigger generations, so that's where it's more parent to child type of generations, where we have larger cycles playing out. As I said, the 60s, and then their kids were the Pluto and Virgo generation, which then created, again, some order out of chaos. They kind of created some change in positive and negative ways, right? And then after that, we had the Pluto and Libra generation, which was more or less about relationships. And it was kind of that generation that erupted the near 50% divorce rate, which is actually kind of interesting if you do the history on that. And then after the Pluto and Libra generation, we had the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which is the millennials, and they're just kind of tearing up the system, for better or for worse. And then we have my generation, which is a Pluto and Sagittarius generation, which is really kind of leading the new direction of where Earth is going. And now this generation that's coming up is the Pluto and Capricorn generation, which is they're going to be the ones that are doing the work. So my youngest brothers, they're part of that generation. And the way that I always like to describe it is the Pluto and Scorpio generation tend to just rip shit apart and break it all down. They're the generation that was breaking down the gender norms and the they thems and all that stuff. Then you had Pluto and Sagittarius, which was saying, okay, what direction do we want to go now as a collective? It's not enough to deconstruct a society. We have to do something with we have to have a direction in mind here. But talking is not enough either, and that's where this next generation that's coming up, they're the ones that are really going to be doing the work. So my generation, we don't really like to do as much work. We like to kind of more like point to the you go over there.
Sit around behind them.
The algorithm writers, and then the next guys will actually run it.
Exactly. That's a good way of saying it. And you can kind of see the generation before us as they were more or less the ones who had to kind of break down the system in order. Yeah, exactly. Control Alt Delete. That's a really good way of saying it. Yeah, several times in lots of areas. Again, for better or for worse. No, you are the Pluto in Libra generation. Yep, before that. Pluto in Libra.
All right.
My parents' generation. The houses are where the astrology happens in our lives. So each house represents a different area of our life in some way. And that kind of adds another level of personalization, as that changes every 2 hours with the ascendant as well. Houses are what makes astrology personal. So the way that I like to describe it is, when you're born that day, everyone that was born that day had the sun in that sign. Almost everyone, depending on if there's a few exceptions to that, obviously. But in general,
people born typically on the 21st, 22nd.
Yeah, between the 18th to the 22nd, 23rd. That's usually the cusp periods for changing seasons, and that's where things get a little complicated. But also, like I said, the moon could be changing signs that day. Changes every 2.5 days. It's pretty common for moon to change signs. And Mercury can also change signs once a month, so that's also relatively common as well. Sometimes twice in a month if Mercury's moving fast. So there's exceptions to that. So yeah, but I mean, the houses, the houses represent essentially what personalizes it all to us. So the first house symbolizes self. It symbolizes who you are. It symbolizes your physical appearance. The second house, and there's 12 houses, there's 12 signs. So they all align. One sign rules each house. And we don't want to get too complicated here, because
you can have can you have the same sign ruling different houses?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Depending on, because there's what's called house systems, and that's the whole other.
Yeah.
We don't want to get too complicated now, because I want people to be able to understand this. But yeah, the way that I use astrology, and the house system that I use, which is one of the most ancient house systems, and one of the first, assigns one sign to a house, which makes it very easy. So each house has a ruler. That ruler impacts that area of your life, on top of whatever planets are in that house. So the first house represents self, represents personality, it represents your physical appearance. Second house represents wealth, represents the money that you receive, little transactions. Third house represents communication, it represents messages, it represents siblings. Fourth house represents your conditioning, your upbringing, your home life, your mother. Fifth house is sexuality, creativity, activity. Sixth house is the body, health problems. Seventh house is relationships, interpersonal and intimate. Eighth house is other people's money, debts. It also represents death, sex, transformation, the kind of alchemy. And ninth house is higher education, learning, travel. 10th house is career, how you show up in the world, how people perceive you. 11th house is your network, your friends, your community. And the 12th house is your deepest unconscious, or the kind of traumas and spirituality as well. So those kind of, like I said before, when we're born, everyone in that was born on my birthday had all the same planets that I do. What makes me unique compared to them is the time that I was born, because that sets the alignment, meaning that I can have planets in very different houses than someone born a few hours later that day. And that's what makes it specific to me versus them. So when people say, oh, astrology, it's not, people like to use that argument that it's not legit because it's so generic. Well, it's not. It's very specific, actually. And the people that say that have no idea what they're talking about. So, and that's the reason, too. Is like I said, every 2 hours the ascendant changes, which means every 2 hours the chart changes. And actually, sometimes even less than 2 hours the chart can change.
I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah. No, astrology is fascinating both on an interpersonal level and relationships, and how it, what we call in astrology, natal astrology is very, very cool. Then we have what's called mundane astrology. There's lots of different areas of astrology, but mundane astrology is looking more or less at the cycles on Earth and how they kind of correlate the history and all that stuff, which is also fun to look at as well. Then you have financial astrology and vocational astrology for career and stuff, and I do a lot of business astrology and stuff like that as well, for helping businesses and corporate leaders and stuff to kind of direct their company. And
can you, I didn't know you before, obviously we started Sarafino. Can you do, because I know people will get a reading done for, I guess, launching a brand or a company. So is there a reading you can do for an established company?
Yeah, you can do like corporate charts. Like my corporation has a chart.
Like to see when or where of new ventures or... Yeah.
Like you'll have bigger cycles that play out in the corporation. You'll have smaller cycles that play out in the corporation. That's what financial astrology really looks like at too. But also any sort of like business astrology, you want to look at both obviously the financial stuff, but also the directions. Like, sometimes like why do certain brands just feel like they're outdated? Well, it's because they need a rebrand, and they kind of feel that, and they have that pressure, and usually there's astrological indicators for that to happen as well.
Is it
or new leadership, like firing a CEO or something like that. There's some sort of scandal. Like there's lots of indicators of stuff like that, and that's why I truly believe within the next 20 years specifically, it's already begun. A lot of my friends that are astrologers and colleagues have already started doing a lot more consulting with brands and with businesses and business leaders and professionals and stuff, and getting more involved in the corporate world. And I've done actually a surprising amount of work in that industry just for my age and for how long I've been in this industry. But that's becoming a lot more popular because I think people are realizing that, hey, there's something to this. Not only just the corporate relationships between people, which is cool, and I like that. That's kind of what got me introduced to all that, was saying, okay, well, yeah, like there's a lot of conscious leaders in the community. It's cool to know who you're working with. It's cool to understand the environments. Why do I not get along with this person, but I really get along with this person? But it's also interesting to look at the relationships that individuals have with the company, the relationships that the company has with the world, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of kind of correlations there for sure.
I guess to give maybe astrology some more credit for some people, but I don't know if it was from you, but I've heard it or read it a few times, but especially with financial institutions, like, I don't know if it's sort of more common thing to have, like, I guess it's not publicized, but they have an astrologer like that even works on staff. No, and it's it's been around for a while, actually, like a long time, like hundreds of years. Is my understanding correct to, like, I guess a wizard or like whatever people have an idea about castles and royal families and stuff, like the wizard of the sage, the wise man, the shaman, there's the mystic. John Dee was a great astrologer for Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth, and in the 1500s and so on. So this has been around for a long time, consulting with the royals and doing all that. That's actually, I would say, how probably horoscopes started, was for the royals before it got down to you could be homeless and be looking at astrology. It was never like that. Olive oil dealer getting
exactly. Yeah, I don't know. You're a presidente, buddy. President. But yeah, no, that's a big thing. It's not publicized, but if you go to, for example, NASDAQ or the TSX or any of the big trading exchanges, there's a very good chance that you'll find an astrology book or two on the floor there or around. There's a very good chance that many of the traders for institutions are keeping up with astrology. I know quite a few of my colleagues do kind of yearly forecasts for the financial markets or the commodities or whatever, and a lot of traders use astrology. A lot of institutions use astrology and consult with astrologers, whether it's dates for launching products or going certain places, going in a new direction, hiring, firing, shifting corporate structures. There's so much that you can actually utilize astrology for, which kind of seems from the outsider's view well, why would you even need that? It just kind of sounds like astrology is just more for like self-development and all that stuff, which it is, but especially as we become more conscious as individuals, obviously our corporations are going to become more conscious, and so are the institutions. The truth is, though, and JP Morgan actually said this a long time, he says, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do, you know, and that's the truth. It's like all these guys have astrologers on hand. But astrologer is a kind of a bridge, I would say, between the tangible and the intangible, and so that's why a lot of even the traditional corporate structures feel comfortable hiring astrologers. Again, it's not publicized, so not comfortable enough to say, hey, TD Bank, we hire astrologers. You know, it's like, no, not yet. I think within 20 years, we'll see more of that, where it'll just be kind of common knowledge. But I've got a lot of friends that consult royal family members, celebrities, CEOs, Fortune 500 companies, like big guys. And they're all into it. So it's there. It's real.
This might actually be a good point to just set that reminder that of it not being causative, but indicators and influence.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's patterns, right? So it's like it's being aware of the patterns. And I mean, in the financial markets and in the corporate markets and stuff, you want to be able to identify those patterns before your competition does. You want to be able to identify those patterns before shit hits the fan. You know, you want to be able to know that, hey, maybe it's not the best day to launch a product because the technology is going to fail or something's going to go wrong. Again, it's not causational. It's just saying that there's indicators, there's patterns, there's triggers, there's signs that say, hey, this is an ideal time for certain experiences and this is an unideal time for certain experiences. Does that mean it's impossible to get by, launching a product on said date? No. Now, you know, there's a lot of companies that, and I could use like example after example, launching products during Mercury retrograde periods where the product has failed or the server has crashed or something has gone wrong, where if you consult an astrologer, you wouldn't have that problem. So yes, it's not causational, but there's a lot of indicators. It's kind of like, you know, you can go fishing anytime, but are there good times and bad times to go fishing? Yeah. You know, there's times where the fish are going to be out and there's times when the fish is not going to be out. Just like going hunting, just like doing pretty much any sport. It's like you can go try and fly a kite in a thunderstorm, you know, but there's going to be a lot of wind. But is that the ideal climate for that? No.
Chance of getting electrocuted.
So on and so forth. So that's kind of what I mean by that. It's not like you're saying that, well, because it's thundering outside, I can never fly a kite, or it's the worst time to fly a kite. You know, the thunderstorm is causing me not to fly a kite. It's like, no, you're choosing not to fly a kite because you know, kind of just common sense here, the weather is not ideal, you know?
So it makes you think about things and gets you on trains of thought and ideas that you wouldn't have otherwise even had, you know, on your
Exactly.
radar.
Yeah, you start to be able to work with the flow of life or creation as opposed to just trying to force your way through like we like to do as humans. And the truth is it's a co-creative experience. We're not just like, even the whole law of attraction and getting into that, like that's fine and dandy. Sure, we all create our own experiences, but there's also rhythms, there's flows to nature and to reality, and there's big cycles playing out, there's small cycles playing out. Just like, you know, like you don't have your boat in the shallow waters when the tide's, you know, rolling out, right? It's like it's gonna hit rock bottom, and then the tide's gonna come and destroy your boat. So you could say, well, you know, this thing is causing my boat not to, you know, it's causing my boat to have problems. It's like, no, you could have just read the signs. You could have just saw that the moon's in this sign, or the moon is at this point in its phase, and I could have moved my boat slightly this way the day before, and it would have been fine. Wouldn't have any problems. So that's kind of the point of astrology in that type of setting. And not a lot of people are aware of that, and more and more people are becoming aware of that, which is cool to see as an astrologer. I mean, you guys use astrologers at Sarafino.
Yeah.
For Western people, it is a very hard thing to
grasp.
See it with their eyes. It's not right.
Now, this is something interesting, though. In India, every corporation uses astrologers. Every corporation. Every single one. Like, I would have a difficult time finding a corporation that does not use astrology in some way to plan dates.
Maybe China.
China
too.
is the same thing. They do Chinese astrology, same thing. Like China specifically built a U.S. embassy on not only a feng shui point, but at a point in a city where the energy was extra harsh and malefic, aka going to cause problems. So they're big believers in that stuff too.
Yeah, I bet. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know. Is it? I gotta ask, because it came. Well, so the solar eclipse, which I did want to ask you more about that, but the solar eclipse, there was something that happened that day, and I know there was probably other things that haven't come across my eyes, but there was, I think, I don't know if it was just here in Canada or anywhere else, but the vaccine got rolled out that day. And I'm like, that's weird. I'm like, it was rushed, and I was like putting some things together. And I don't really want to get into this too much, yeah. But it seemed kind of weird that
they did not consult astrologers for that. I have to say that. Unless their intention was for it to go haywire, which, hey, maybe maybe they did and they wanted it to be like that. But yeah, astrologically speaking, there was a lot of things wrong. I was talking to some colleagues about that, like everything wrong with the date of the first person getting the vaccine, the date of it rolling out right after the solar eclipse, which eclipses are times where you just kind of need to let go and surrender and not do a whole lot. Like no manifesting, none of that really. Like there's how many moon cycles in a year that you can manifest and make wishes on and do magic on. There's a few out of the year called eclipses that we don't do that. The natives and the indigenous peoples and the ancient cultures, they saw that as a big threat to their society. The sun, which is the giver of life, was, imagine you're an ancient culture and you're not familiar with astrology. Language is just a new thing. You're going about your day, and all of a sudden, in the daytime, and you're getting used to the day and then the night, and then the day and the night, and then the moon is full and then the moon goes away, and then the moon is full, and this is consistent, this is rhythmic, this is okay. And then all of a sudden, you're in the day, you're farming your field, and the sun disappears. You think, the world is ending.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of symbolic representation of that, but that they treated eclipses very, very seriously. And in ancient astrology, they saw that as a kind of dethroning of the king, where oftentimes they would actually remove the king, abdicate him, put someone else there, and then when the eclipse was over, they'd murder him and put the king back on. And that would be a way of them, in a sense, realizing that there's transits, there's cycles happening. The king is threatened in some way. So we make adjustments in our life to allow that to happen. And then we can go about business as usual by making the specific adjustments. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but the same thing goes on our day-to-day lives. It's not about, that's why awareness is such a key component in astrology. And to be honest, not even enough astrologers take that into consideration of, it's not about completely rearranging your life for what the hell's going on out there. Because to me, astrology is about living life in harmony with nature. But it is just being aware of the influences that are happening in the world and happening to us as individuals and happening to us as collectives.
Yeah, I mean, everything we build is out of nature. It's a team effort,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So what's the difference between solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse?
So a solar eclipse is
In terms of what it represents, I guess. I think
yeah, well, in a sense, a solar eclipse represents, I mean, the eclipses in general, they're very they're similar in that aspect of the fact that they represent times of you can kind of call them almost gateway periods where we're leaving certain traits, characteristics, experiences behind. We're entering into new. It's a eclipse season, which is what we call it in astrology, are in between eclipses, right? It's about 2 weeks before the first eclipse, about all the way up to 2 weeks after the last eclipse in that cycle. So eclipses happen in pairs or triads. So once that kind of period is over, then things go back to normal. Solar eclipses happen when we have a new moon, and lunar eclipses happen when we have a full moon. So that's the big difference, full moon versus new moon. But solar eclipses are, in a sense, a threatening or a a period of change to our personality, our ego, change to our conscious self, whereas lunar eclipses represent shifts and change and transformation to our unconscious self, or our conditioned self, our emotional self. So that's the slight variance. But in general, like I said, they represent that period of shifting, of transformation. Again, it happens every year. Mm-hmm. But what changes each year, or approximately every 18 months, is that the eclipses happen in different pairs of signs. And those pairs of signs, as we now know, influence us all differently based off of the time that we were born, because we have different signs in our chart in different places, aka different houses in our chart. And those are what really matters. And that's where, for periods of 2 years, approximately 2 years, 18 months I said, about 18 months. There's bigger cycles at play, but and then also 18-year cycles. Every 18 years, you have eclipses activating stuff in your chart that happened 18 years ago. So usually what that means is similar themes to where you were 18 years ago begin to occur. Similar shifts, similar realizations. Maybe people from your past come back and you got to work some stuff out. It could be something as kind of basic as that, or it could be something as impactful as you get a realization of some trauma that happened 18 years ago that you haven't resolved yet and you're working through, you know? So astrology is all about, like I said, relationships. That's really what it is. It studies relationships on all levels. Relationships between the planets, relationships between the planets and you, relationships between you and I and our planets and where our planets are, as well as the relationships of the cycles of planets, aka the planets in relation to our own natal chart and our own astrology. And those relationships dictate how we experience life and how we go about our daily lives and how we're influenced in our daily lives. Why is it that certain people feel a little icky on certain moon signs when the moon is in a certain sign? And maybe they're not always aware of that, but if they were to start tracking the moon, they would find that, hey, when the moon transits my 12th house, I tend to feel a lot more tired than when the moon doesn't. Or maybe when the moon transits my 10th house, I start to feel more energized for my work, and I start to feel really more, anchored and tuned in, versus when the moon's in my 4th house, I start to feel more like a homebody. I don't want to leave. So there's lots of things that just literally tracking the moon, which you can do for free. You can download an app called Time Passages or an app called Time Nomad. These will help you track. It's free apps. You can track the astrology. You can track where the moon is, what moon phase is in, what sign it's in. You can learn about your own chart.
I've thought about your own astrology. One thing that triggered that for me was that, so occasionally I just get into this bout of writing poems, mm-hmm. and I feel like it turns on, and then mm-hmm. I'm like, I can write. Of course, I have a special someone that inspires me, but there's certain.
Oh, you're talking about me.
You've gotten some poems.
I have gotten some poems, and some pretty great ones, I had to say.
Last Christmas, you got a poem.
I did. I got an excellent poem last Christmas.
Man, that was amazing.
It was incredible.
Yeah, so I know that there's certain, and I feel like I'm aware of like certain moods that I get into, and I'm like, what? Why is it that not that I'm like, I want to, like you're saying, to blame the planet, but it's just like it sort of brings your awareness to that. I'm like, okay, well, this is,
Again, it's not saying that I can't write poems when the moon is in this sign, It's like, no. One day you're going to write a poem when the moon is in the sign that maybe least supports that, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Because, like I said, it's not causational, it's reflectional. But does that mean that it has no impact on us whatsoever? Absolutely not. It does have an impact on us. It does influence us. It doesn't control us. It doesn't dictate our decisions. It doesn't override our free will. But specifically when people are living from a more unconscious state, they tend to be a little bit more stubborn in their directions. And then usually when harder transits hits, that's when they get the wake-up call. But when you're more tuned in, you do start to be more in touch with that stuff. And you do start to notice that, hey, certain times of the month, I shift in different ways. And I'm noticing a trend here. I'm noticing a pattern here. Or for a lot of people, it's seasonal. Certain seasons are more activated. Other seasons are more timid. People are more relaxed, Mm-hmm. So then why doesn't everybody always feel energized in the summer? Why doesn't everybody always feel slouchy and kind of timid in the winter? Well, you know, all these things have different effects, right, on us.
Winter's okay and whatever. I'm born in December, and I was sort of like conflicted with like that, but I'm like, I like it hot, man. Like I want 30-degree weather, and like some people like look at me, I'm like, they look like I want to be, you know, covered up in the shade or something. I'm like, no, man, I want like full sun exposure. Give me as much as I possibly can. And I feel like I can handle the heat for some reason, and like I could be out, even though I don't obviously live the life where I could be doing, well, I guess I could be doing anything, but I just, you know, being the president of a company, you got to sit in front of a computer and on a phone, in a car, in a plane or whatever. But it's just, I want the sun.
I like the sun too. I'm an Aries. I like it hot, but I need to be near the water. Like even where I am now, it's still close enough like to the water that if I want to go down, I can go down. You know, I've always lived by bodies of water my whole life. Need that. I'm a Pisces rising. Need to be by a lake. Otherwise, like landlocked. Ooh. You know, streams don't do it. Need a big body of water. The ocean is the goal. But for now, it's like lakes are cool. You know,
biggest body of water we know of on the planet. Okay, well, that's a pretty good rundown of astrology.
I'd say so. I'd say much more than the average olive oil connoisseur would ever get in their lifetime, whether they're aware of it or not. Sarafino's pretty astrologically oriented.
Yeah, well, there's...
I remember when you telling me about your family's olive, you saw the astro symbols, right?
Well, there's...
planetary symbols?
With, which I didn't realize until, well, later on, but there is a form of astrology done with old traditional farming techniques, which biodynamics is completely connected to planetary energies. But even like with, you know, doing our garden with my dad or whatever, it's like I always forget what it is, if it's waxing or waning. Pretty sure it's waxing, that you plant the garden, you plant seeds on a waxing moon. And even like coming to like bottling wine and stuff like that, there's like, it was always according to the moon. I don't know if they ever took into consideration other planetary symbols, whereas biodynamic, I mean, there's, to every planet, there's, you know, there's associated seed, there's an associated flower type, there's an associated wood, especially when it comes to balsamic vinegar. Like each type of wood is associated to a planet. And it makes, and like biodynamic is not, like that's scientifically backed up.
Yeah.
Most people are unaware of that, but they're also
unaware of biodynamic, period.
And it's been around longer than organic.
Oh, yeah. It's much longer. I mean, that's really the OG, what organic is, you know. That's nature.
Yeah.
Nature is in itself biodynamic, you know.
Being in sync with it and knowing as a human what to do at what certain times, and it's learning how to read. That's actually brought some learning how to read the degrees of the moon and the stars, which I don't know if this is I don't know if I heard this somewhere or read it or I found it interesting, but universe, you went to this school to learn and to get your moon and stars degree, which is your master's degree, and like you got your master's degree once you understood what the moon and the stars were telling you. It's like, that's pretty interesting. I think that's like for etymology or whatever, like that's where the word masters comes from, is the word moon and stars. University, like why is it called university?
While you're on etymology, you might as well do
Mundane.
Monday.
Yeah, and that was something that shocked me too. Thanks for the reminder, Michael. It's like, you know, we learned the days of the week when we're in grade JK or whatever it is. I mean, most kids, I guess, learn that at and maybe by their parents. You learn the day. Like those are one of the first.
In Canada, you learn it in French too, which shows you the planetary names.
A little more clearly.
The planetary names are.
I mean, for me, I didn't get it, and a lot of people, most people I ask today, whether they're in their 20s or 40s or 90s, unless sometimes if they're, you know, Latin got some Latin language in there, then they can associate it to it easily. But it's even written in English. But when we think of like Sunday, I mean, it's blatantly obvious what that day of the week represents, but it wasn't pointed out. I wasn't pointed out to me unless I wasn't listening in that grade 2 class or grade 1 class or whatever it should have been. That like, hey, everybody, boys and girls, Sunday represents the sun. And Monday, the sons of bitches dropped one of the O's and made it a Monday instead of Moon Day. But Monday's actually like, this day that we sort of named after that moon over there that, that rotates and does all these crazy things to us on us humans on the planet. And this, like, we never got into that. And Tuesday.
Or Tuesday, as they say in French, Mardi. Mars Day.
Mardi, yeah.
Mars Day.
Mercury.
Wednesday. Or Woden's Day. And
Mercury.
Odin was Mercury.
Wednesday, yeah.
Thursday or Jeudi. Jupiter Day. Friday. Freya Day.
Italian,
Venus Day. Vendredi. Saturday. I mean, they're just missing the N there. Saturn Day.
Drop the letter.
Yeah.
And totally like.
Same with Monday.